Hi everyone, and welcome to Module 2. So last week we discussed why we punish people, and then we talked about the philosophies that have shaped our correctional policy. This week I'm going to shift our focus from corrections overall to the realities of incarceration. So when you hear the word prison, what comes to mind? For most people, that answer is very physical. They picture walls, fences, razor wire, correctional officers, guards, maybe batons, lots of security, right? And these things definitely matter, absolutely. But prisons are more than just the security on the building. They're also social environments where potentially thousands of people live and work together every day under highly structured conditions. Now, to understand prison culture, I want you to begin by imagining yourself in your offender's shoes. So I want you to kind of picture this here. You're taken from your home, you're separated from your family, you're assigned an identification number, and you're transported to a place where nearly every aspect of your life is controlled by somebody else, right? You don't get to decide when to wake up. You don't get to decide when you want to eat. You don't get to decide where your bed is, or who your neighbors are, or who you share a room with. You don't decide when you leave. Your privacy is really limited. Your movement is limited, and your daily schedule is pretty much determined by somebody else. Now imagine everybody else around you is also experiencing that same loss of control. How do you adapt? Who do you trust? Who do you talk to? Who do you befriend in that kind of environment? How do you make sure that you feel safe? These are the questions at the heart of prison culture. One of the most important things that researchers have learned is that prisons develop their own social systems. Formal rules certainly exist, right? Correctional administrators will create policies that govern behavior and prisoner movement, and then correctional officers or guards will enforce those policies. But prisons also have a lot of informal rules, informal expectations, hierarchies, relationships, and other social norms that shape the daily life that aren't written in stone. Prison culture develops because human beings are remarkably adaptable, right? So even in highly restricted environments, people are going to create systems of meetings, relationships, and overall social organization. Now, there's two theories that researchers have proposed about how prison cultures develop. The first perspective is the deprivation model. So this model argues that prison culture emerges because of the losses associated with incarceration. So I lose my freedom, my privacy, my independence, and my control over my daily life. And so because of that, I'm going to create a prison culture that allows me to adapt to losing all of that. The other perspective, on the other hand, is the importation model. And so what that argues is that when someone comes into prison, they bring all of their identities, they bring their culture, they bring their own routines and expectations and their own values and identities. And so because of that, they bring in to the prison a lot of social dynamics that existed even before incarceration, and it continues within the correctional system. Today, most researchers recognize that both of these perspectives matter, right? Prison culture is shaped by both the losses that the prisoners experience as a result of being forced into this confinement, and also by what those people bring in from the outside culture and from their own identities that they bring into the institution. And that brings us to one of the most common public perceptions about prison: violence. Many people assume that violence is simply an unavoidable part of incarceration. And violence certainly exists in correctional institutions, and it has a long history. But researchers have found that it's not distributed evenly across all facilities, which, if violence was inevitable, it would be random and it would be present across all types of offenses, all types of prison populations, all types of prisons. It's not, which tells us that there are things that enhance or decrease the risk of violence occurring. So researchers note that violence really it's a complex interaction. It's institutional conditions, it's prison culture, it's staffing and management practices, it's the inmates themselves, it's the opportunities available to those inmates for leisure and for free time and vocations. All of those things come together to affect how often we're going to see violence and what kind of violence we're going to see. And that really makes sense, right? If you think about it. If I go into prison and I am as a prisoner, if I feel unsafe, if I feel like I can't resolve conflicts through any legitimate channels, right? Like maybe I can go tell the warden, but I have to trust that the warden's going to help me. So if I don't trust, then I have to come up with an alternative method of protecting myself. And so when we see institutions where the trust between the incarcerated people and the staff is low, we're going to see a lot more informal systems of power and control, because those prisoners and those inmates are going to take over the responsibilities to shape the culture that they don't feel the staff can handle. If institutional conditions create chronic stress or frustration, for example, if you're in a prison that was designed to fit 100 people and it regularly holds daily 150 to 200 people. Now we have multiple people per cell. Maybe we have bunk beds instead of a single bed. We have all kinds of things, right, that are going to change the tension and the chronic stress of living in that institution. Now, again, that's not to say it excuses violence, but it does help us understand why this violence occurs sometimes more often than others. And that gives us ideas of how we can reduce violence in an institutional setting ultimately. Now, again, do want to point out, I'm going to talk a lot about, in your readings, we'll talk a lot about prison culture as a result of the inmates, the inmate characteristics. But it is important to remember that prison culture is not just shaped by the people that are incarcerated there, right? So correctional staff do play a critical role in creating the environment within the facility. And at the same time, institutions are dealing with the challenges that we talked about last week, right? So a correctional institution is trying to juggle all these different goals. The citizens want it to maintain safety and security for them, right? When I send someone to prison as a taxpayer, I want that prison to protect me as the taxpayer. When I send somebody to prison and I work at a prison, when I work there, I want the prison to protect me as a staff member. And when I send a loved one to prison as a family member of an incarcerated person, I want the prison to protect my family member. So all of these things are happening. The institutional goals are trying to accomplish all of that. And that can be challenging. So they're trying to maintain order, enforce their rules, operate within their particular budget, which oftentimes is pretty limited, right? Because we don't want to spend a lot of money on people that we deem as problem children. And so that can be a challenge. And also nowadays we have the whole rehabilitation. So now not only do I want you to maintain order and control and keep them away from me, I also want you to rehabilitate and give them programming and give them, prepare them for success on the outside. That's a tall order, right? So here's an example situation. Let's say a prison is experiencing an increase in gang violence, and administrators respond to the increase in violence by implementing the lockdown. And from the institution's perspective, if they limit of inmate movement, that can reduce opportunities for violence, and that can help the administration restore order. Excellent, right? And that seems like an entirely reasonable response to an immediate safety concern. But then you also have to think about the other way. What does that same lockdown feel from the perspective of an incarcerated person? What does it feel like to lose access to recreational facilities, to educational programming? What does it feel like to be restricted from visiting or going to religious ceremonies? And how is that going to affect how I, as a prisoner, am going to interact with my institution? Particularly because, in any situation, when we're talking about gang violence, we're not talking about the whole prison. We're not talking about everybody in the prison. But when we're talking about lockdown, that's everybody in the prison, right? So it's this push and pull between what's happening and the institutional's response and desire to maintain order, but also still trying to treat inmates humanely, trying to get them to be successful as an individual in the outside society. So always remember, go back to those questions I talked about last week. Don't just ask, does this work? Does prison work? That's not the question. The question is, who does prison work for? What are the intended consequences of prison? What are the unintended consequences of prison? And who does prison work better for under what circumstances? Now, this is going to be the first week that you're going to begin working with your prisoner case study. So this week you have one assigned reading from me, and then you're going to locate an additional scholarly source that relates specifically to your offender. So for example, if you have a veteran, well, then you might want to go look up incarceration and veterans specifically. Or if you have someone that has substance use, maybe you should go research into substance use and how that affects prisoners. And remember, your whole team is researching your prisoner, and you don't want to all research the same thing, right? So maybe somebody goes, hey, our person's a veteran and he has a substance abuse issue. So one of you can look up veteran status, one of you can look up substance abuse issues, one of you can look up isolation cells or something, so you can all work together to better understand what's happening to your prisoner. Now during class, you're going to come together, and each team is going to have time in class to go into breakout rooms and discuss how their research went, what they found, and how the concepts from that particular module apply to your offender's experiences. So everything you do this week, I want you to think about, how does this apply to your offender? I want you really to try to put yourself in their shoes. So I'm going to give you an idea here. So let's say you're on the Elena team. So I want you to think about, what's it like to enter prison at just 21 years old? She's experienced instability throughout her life, right? But she's never gone to prison before. So what is she feeling when she gets in? Is she frightened? Is she looking for acceptance or belonging? What do you think she's going to do in those first couple months? What's that transition look like? Go find research that helps you answer those questions. And then you guys and your team can discuss, what do we think Elena's doing? How's she feeling? What are the impacts on Elena's mental health, her physical health, her behaviors? What are our expectations, knowing what we've actually just learned in this module? James, I want you to think about, how might incarceration affect someone who's already struggling with PTSD, depression, and substance use, right? How are those challenges going to influence his relationship with the other inmates? How are those challenges going to affect how he deals and interacts with the correctional staff, right? So maybe he's going to be a little bit different than Elena because of their background. Sarah, think about her children. That's going to be a big issue with Sarah. What does it mean to be institutionalized and separated from your children? How does that affect Sarah's emotional well-being? How does that affect her decision making? And what's Sarah's first couple months going to look like? What is going to help Sarah be successful in prison? How is that going to be different or unique to Sarah versus all the others? David, think about the unique challenges associated with a sex offense. How is the stigma of a sexual offense going to affect David's interactions behind bars? And think here, prisoners and staff, right? Do you have concerns about his safety? What about the safety of others in the prison? Are there going to be things that happen to David in those first couple days because of his particular circumstance? And what does David need to be successful in the institutional environment? And lastly, if you are on Robert's team, think about what happens when incarceration is no longer temporary, but now it's becoming a way of life, right? So how is Robert doing now that he's been in this prison for years, even decades? How does he adapt, and what new challenges are going to emerge as David continues to age behind bars? So hopefully that gives you some idea of kind of what I'm looking for here. You really have a lot of freedom when you're picking your articles, but it's about finding things that interest you and digging into it. I want you to be curious, right? This is not about go find a reading because you have to do this study. It's about think of some questions that you have and try to figure out, how would you answer that? What have other people told you, so that you can help us understand how your person is dealing with their new incarceration. The more we understand what offenders experience inside the correctional institution, the better equipped we are to critically evaluate correctional policies, to identify those challenges that our institutional corrections are facing, and to develop evidence-based reforms that are going to both improve public safety and also meet the correctional outcomes that the correctional system is designed to do, right? So I look forward to your observations. Good luck researching, and I'll see you in Module 2.